I can honestly say I never thought I'd hit 100,000 subscribers. Back in my first year on YouTube, a friend asked me if I'd ever consider starting a Patreon, and I flippantly said I would if I ever hit like 10,000 subscribers, because that seemed like an impossible number. I'll get the big sentimental words out right from the top and simply say thank you to everyone subscribed to Eyebrow Cinema. No one achieves any kind of success on this platform without a whole lot of help, and I am grateful for all your support. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, on to business. The only way to properly mark this milestone is with a video counting down my top 100 movies of all time. And after months of painstakingly assembling my picks, the list is finally ready. No doubt some of you are wondering right now, is this a best movies list or a favorites movies list? And the answer is, of course, yes. There is no objective way to calculate the definitive best movies ever list. Just a whole lot of people giving their subjective picks for what they think are the best movies ever. And these are mine, which is to say, these are my favorites. And I want to stress that subjectivity. I do not intend this list to be some all-encompassing survey of the cinema and the many, many people who make movies, a task which would no doubt be impossible in the first place. No, this list is more simply 100 movies that I love. No more and no less. Couple other notes. First, I've decided to limit myself to just one film per director. No doubt this will annoy my Cinema in Seconds podcast co-host, but it's necessary if I want to avoid something like 50% of the list being taken up by the same dozen names. Second, this list will not include any documentaries. That's not meant as a slight against the format. I just can't wrap my head around ranking docs next to narrative films. And finally, even with all these restrictions, all these efforts to generate a greater variety of films, I still was not able to find space for every film I love in this list. 100 is simply too small a number for all the great movies out there. So if your favorite movie's missing from the list, or I chose a different top pick from your favorite director, please know that it wasn't anything personal. And with all that established, let's get cooking. Number 100, Easy Rider. I had a lot of tantalizing options for list openers. Do I go with a recent movie and go all in on a future classic? Or maybe I should pick something rough and scrappy, but that means a lot to me personally. Or maybe champion something underseen and try to raise its profile. These are all considerations, but I ultimately decided to go with a movie that I initially wouldn't have pegged as an all-timer, but that snuck up on me slowly over time. Easy Rider was actually one of the first movies I watched as a teenager moving through the AFI's Top 100 list, and it immediately shattered my perceptions of what a classic film looked like. I remember liking the movie okay, but I do also remember being frustrated by its languid pacing, lack of plot, and the more avant-garde editing. It's a film that at the time I didn't really get, and over the next 15 years, I just kept watching it. The film always seemed to come up in my research, or in events I was involved with, or in classes I was teaching, and with every new viewing, I found myself falling a little bit more in love with the film. The more I learned about film history and Easy Rider's place within it, the more I came to see just how innovative and striking the film's style was. And the more I learned about the 60s, the more I could see the film as a fascinating product of that time. Aspects of the film now feel dated, but in a way that's more rewarding than distracting. Easy Rider, this revealing time capsule of both the culture and idealism of the 60s, and the encroaching despair of the 70s. Seeing the film in theaters also helped a lot, as I was best able to chill out and enjoy the scenic route Wyatt and Billy take through America's open roads, scored to an incredible collection of folk and rock music. Number 99, The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing, specifically, though maybe that doesn't actually need to be specified. His remake of The Thing has completely transformed from a critically derided flop to one of the most beloved horror movies of the last 50 years, and it's easy to see why. Whether you come to the film for its icy paranoia, or its ensemble cast of rough and tumble dudes, or its deranged body horror, so grotesque it actually loops back around to being beautiful, the film delivers in spades. It's also the film that plays best to Carpenter's strengths, providing the resources to realize his creativity and apocalyptic visions, yet still pushed forward by a slow burn dread. Number 98, Parasite. Spoilers for the rest of this list, but Parasite is the most recently released movie to crack my top 100. That's not out of any disdain for contemporary cinema, I just tend to take time to christen new movies amongst my favorites. But even I couldn't deny Parasite. Bong Joon-ho's craft is polished to a mirror shine, and the twisty narrative is endlessly rewarding. But of course, what puts Parasite over the top is its commentary on life under capitalism. The film both a metaphor for how the labor of an exploited underclass sustains the privileges of the wealthy, but also just a vivid representation of that system. Bong famously said when discussing Parasite's wide appeal, "We all live in a country called capitalism, and the film is awash in images which help us understand our country's language." Number 97, Casablanca. I hemmed and hawed on whether I'd actually place Casablanca on this list, given its already substantial degree of recognition and fame. Such is the rarefied air that Casablanca breathes, a film so universally beloved across generations that it's easy to take for granted. We all know it's great after all. But to revisit the film is to remember just how special it really is. Combining the glamour of old Hollywood with an immaculate screenplay full of quotable dialogue and a formidable cast of legends delivering some of their best work, Casablanca is a summit of everything great about the classical studio system. And honestly, it's a little bit more than even that. At the core of the film is a convincing statement about the moral responsibility of doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything. It's a simple message, bordering on cliché even, but it's necessary all the same. Number 96, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I'm on record that Majesty is far and away the peak of 007. The best looking, the best sounding, most kinetic, most formally ambitious, and most emotionally poignant James Bond movie of all. And that's mostly why the film is here, but it's not the only reason. For better or worse, being a YouTuber has changed how I relate to certain films, and there's no film I feel I've put more of my own personal stamp on than On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It's a film I made some bold claims for, a film I got real emotional on main for, and a film at the center of one of the video essays I'm most proud of and that played a pivotal role in the channel's growth. In other words, it's a movie I feel a unique connection to, and that does distinguish it. And those ski chases don't hurt. Number 95, Batman Returns. Speaking of movies I went hard for on the channel, Batman Returns is the only superhero film on this list, a decision that will no doubt delight some and enrage others. Is it the truest to the letter of the comics it's based on? Absolutely not, but it does capture the spirit of Batman, and of superhero comics more broadly. The film is a fantastical space for adventure and escapism, but one still bound by psychological trauma, at once the most childish of stories, while still being very adult. And speaking of adult, Batman Returns is still unmatched in capturing the perverse eroticism integral to Batman comics. And even with all its heaviness, the film still knows how to have fun.
You missed.
Number 94, A Woman Under the Influence. For years, this was my white whale of unseen American classics from the 70s, so it was a treat when the film completely lived up to its reputation. The centerpiece is, of course, Jenna Rollins' towering performance as Mabel, that rare performance that genuinely deserves to be called fearless. But credit is also due to her co-lead Peter Falk. The pair communicate deep love and unreconcilable toxicity in equal measure, and that makes the drama all the more gutting. The film quite possibly the truest expression of the phrase, "love is not enough." Number 93, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Raw, unvarnished horror, as if it emerged from the depths of the backwoods. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is actually a touch less violent than its title suggests, but what it lacks in graphic bloodshed, it more than makes up for in its sheer relentlessness. This is not a movie you'd describe as operating under dream logic, but it is one of the cinema's greatest nightmares. And like the best nightmares, it doesn't really end so much as it just stops. Number 92, Planet of the Apes. The original, specifically, though that probably needs specifying even less than The Thing did. That Planet of the Apes has spawned so many iterations, the most recent of which being last year, is indicative of how rich a text the original film is. The core allegory of a world where white people, and white men specifically, are the oppressed underclass is still a stark inverted mirror of the inequities in society, and it's also a fantastic premise for a sci-fi horror story. Scratch beneath that though, and you'll also get a compelling portrait of how the ruling class maintains power through propaganda and the shaping of truth. And deeper still, how even the progressives are still prone to the same biases as their more openly hateful counterparts. It's also a highly imaginative sci-fi world where apes rule, and that rules! Number 91, Tokyo Story. It took me a long time to get with the program with Yasujiro Ozu and Tokyo Story. I suppose I'm still not quite with it, as the film's disciples will surely view its placement in this list as shockingly low, but my recent rewatch was a revelation all the same. Ozu's patient observation of elderly parents and their generational disconnect with their adult children does not demand your tears the way a more direct melodrama would, but it gets them all the same. The tiny tremors of conflict reveal an aching hurt, alongside a piercing critique of then-contemporary Japan. But Ozu's voice never rises above a quiet whisper. Life isn't tragic, but it is a little disappointing, and no film taps that realization better. Number 90, The Graduate. Among its many, many accomplishments, I can't think of another film that so acutely taps into comedy and sadness simultaneously as well as The Graduate does. They go hand in hand for Benjamin Braddock, one of cinema's great sad clowns. His dopey social ineptitude is a constant source of laughter. Benjamin's so awkward he can barely speak to a hotel clerk without tripping over his words. But sitting with that hilarity is a disquieting portrait of malaise, a sadness for which a source cannot be articulated, and therefore no solution is ever possible. It's all in that iconic final scene. Laughter and exuberance which gradually fades as the shot lingers on forever, and that darkness comes creeping back. Number 89, All the President's Men. The 1970s saw a string of political thrillers responding to the growing surveillance state, outrage over national tragedies like the Vietnam War, and a growingly transparent corruption in the American government. Hard to believe, I know. Little could these filmmakers have known that such corruption would eventually build to the Watergate scandal and the resignation of a president in disgrace, which in turn would result in the apex of the 70s paranoia thriller, the story of the reporters who broke Watergate in the first place. All the President's Men would have to be based on real events to be so engaging. It doesn't have the sexy elements many of its peers do, and most of its runtime consists of long dialogue scenes where a million names get thrown at you. And it is utterly riveting. It's also a great movie about highly competent professionals doing their jobs exceptionally well. It just so happens that said jobs ended a presidency. Number 88, Nixon. I love All the President's Men, but the sequel is even better. Oliver Stone's epic Richard Nixon biopic has the same blistering filmmaking and incendiary conspiratorial politics that makes his JFK so endlessly watchable, but what puts Nixon over the top is the man at the center. Stone clearly has no love for Nixon politically, but he nonetheless treats the man as worthy of analysis and capable of introspection. The result is an almost Shakespearean tragedy about an ambitious figure brought down by his own hubris and paranoia, conveyed brilliantly by Anthony Hopkins, whose performance is so towering it completely transcends his lack of a physical resemblance. That moment where a disgraced Nixon turns to face the Kennedy portrait, when they look at you, they see what they want to be. When they look at me, they see what they really are. My God, is that some good stuff. Number 87, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. A nightmare world as only the cinema could imagine, and only the silent cinema for that matter. So much of the visual and narrative DNA of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari has lived on throughout the horror movie. It is still Exhibit A when teaching German Expressionism, and its interest in the unreliable perception of psychologically wounded characters and twist ending echo through the genre. Yet even with this sweeping influence across more than a century, Caligari remains singular. We have seen subsequent distorted worlds, subsequent mad scientists and monsters, subsequent scenes where the monster carries his female victim to an uncertain fate, crossing terror and eroticism. But nothing else looks and feels quite like this. Number 86, The Abyss. James Cameron is one of the most commercially successful filmmakers to ever live, so of course his best film is the only one that underperformed at the box office. As with its far more lucrative cousin Titanic, The Abyss combines the machinery of an effects-heavy seafaring blockbuster with a love story, in this case a broken marriage which mends over the course of a close encounter at the depths of the ocean. The film is a nail-biting spectacle that takes on new levels of anxiety when you know how taxing and legitimately dangerous the production really was. But what sealed the film's place on this list is just how earnest it is. For all Cameron's love of military hardware and bursts of machismo, the guy is, at heart, a tree-hugging hippie, and that comes through here in a climactic plea for peace. The Abyss is a day the Earth stood still for the modern age, an imaginative piece of science fiction about sharing our world. Number 85, The Shawshank Redemption. Shawshank's permanent placement on the IMDb's top 250 has made it paradoxically easy to undervalue, especially given that site's reputation for being basic. But that obscures the simple fact that the film really is among the most engrossing movies ever made. There's a reason Shawshank built its reputation as a TV favorite, as it's the kind of film you can throw on casually or stumble across halfway through and just be completely sucked into. I still vividly remember my first watch, knowing little beyond how beloved the film was, and feeling the oppressive stone walls give way to something gentler, kinder, and honestly life-affirming. The image of Andy, arms spread in the rain, is drenched in sentiment, but the film earns every second of it. Number 84, Andrei Rublev. It takes a strong man to admit when he's wrong. Not that I would know anything about that. Number 83, Duck Soup. The Marx Brothers crafted a cinematic legacy out of basically making the same movie over and over again, so much so you'd think it'd be hard to zero in on any one title. But there is one film that stands above the rest, and that's Duck Soup. Made late enough that the brothers had mastered bringing their mixture of wordplay and sight gags to the screen, but before their comedy had been watered down by MGM's insistence that what the boys really needed was unfunny romantic subplots that didn't actually involve the brothers at all. No, Duck Soup sees the Marx Brothers' anarchic comedy at its best. The film is also a great little satire of the ego and insanity at the core of politics. Hard to believe, I know, but it's simply as a joke delivery mechanism that Duck Soup works best. Number 82, If Beale Street Could Talk. Moonlight may have been the more seismic release, but for my money, Beale Street is Barry Jenkins' best film thus far. Telling the story of a young black couple expecting a child and on the cusp of beginning a life together when they are torn apart by a false arrest and imprisonment, If Beale Street Could Talk is incredibly relevant to contemporary social problems without being a polemic. At all times, Jenkins prioritizes his characters and their feelings. The film was adapted from a James Baldwin novel and admirably does not try to contort its source into a more conventional three-act structure. It takes its time with scenes. It feels free to diverge from its main plot, to ruminate on ideas or an experience. Jenkins also demonstrates a quiet confidence in Beale Street's nonlinear structure, in its sumptuous imagery, and in Nicholas Britell's gentle yet heartbreaking score. Number 81, Star Wars. Look past the franchise status, the endless blitz of marketing and merchandise, the legion of angry fans, and the way the series has shaped geek media. Hell, look past how famous and iconic the film and its own sequels are, and you'll come to see a simple truth. Star Wars is one of the cinema's greatest adventures. Even when I've thought I was done with Star Wars or too old for it, those opening notes have always hooked me. And by the time Luke blows up the Death Star, I may as well be 6 years old again. Number 80, Naked. A misanthropic young man wanders London streets while ranting about philosophy and existence to friends and strangers alike. The film really shouldn't be as gripping as it is, but I'll be damned if Mike Leigh and David Thewlis haven't crafted one of the most captivating character portraits I've ever seen. For all that is abjectly horrible about Johnny, and there is a lot, Thewlis is so undeniably charismatic that it becomes impossible to look away. One's eyes can also feast upon London at its grimiest and most unwelcoming. With its long walk and talk through a European city, Naked is almost like the nightmare version of a Richard Linklater movie, and if you can stand to bear it, you're in for something special. Number 79, Mad Max Fury Road. I like the original Mad Max trilogy a lot, especially The Road Warrior, but if you told me at the beginning of 2015 that not only would a belated Mad Max sequel from an elderly George Miller be one of my favorite movies of the year, but one of my favorite movies of all time, I'd have thought you were crazy. But the future does indeed belong to the Mad, because Fury Road really is that good, taking the ingredients of the old films and cooking up an even richer, more elaborate, and more delicious meal. The film is a masterclass in cinematic storytelling and world building that even after a half dozen viewings has not lost a fraction of its excitement. Number 78, Being John Malkovich. For most of the film world, Being John Malkovich served as introduction to writer Charlie Kaufman and director Spike Jonze, and while both have continued to make good work in the decades since, I don't think either have topped their feature debut. Kaufman's peculiar creativity and Jones's cheeky sense of humor are a match made in heaven, and Malkovich sees both at their sharpest and most playful. Satire of office work and criticism of self-obsessed sad sacks like Craig are still cutting, but the overall story and the details of the film's world are just so inventive. It's a fun and funny movie, yet one that can also still spiral you into an existential crisis. Oh, it's also a movie about a portal that allows you to enter the mind of beloved character actor John Malkovich before you're spit into a ditch on the side of the New Jersey Turnpike. I forgot to mention that part. Number 77, RoboCop. I feel like I've grown up with RoboCop. As a child watching the film as my dad fast-forwarded through the really violent parts, I loved it as a kind of superhero movie where a robotic policeman defeated the bad guys. As a teenager allowed to watch those violent parts, I loved the film as an ass-kicking action movie and as the apex of the 80s Hollywood action hero as indestructible killing machine. As a student, I could better appreciate the film's satire of Reagan's America, a corporate nightmare world where the horrors at home and abroad are smothered by advertising, and even the grave can't save you from laboring for the profit of your employers. And as someone who now feels like he's living in the world Paul Verhoeven created, I admire that RoboCop is hopeful that humanity can still endure.
Nice shooting, son. What's your name?
Murphy.
Hell yeah. Number 76, Inglourious Basterds. Quentin Tarantino spent most of his career as a brazenly apolitical filmmaker. All art is political, of course, but you'd be hard-pressed to find explicit political motivations or ideas in the first half of Tarantino's filmography. But that changed pretty radically in 2009 with Inglourious Basterds, which ushered a new era of historical revisionist revenge epics. Writing Nazis or the KKK as the bad guys might not seem an especially brave stance, though in 2025 it's braver than I'd like it to be, but of course that's not all these films are doing. Bastards in particular offers remarkably sophisticated commentary on art's relationship to fascism. as something destroyed by the Nazi regime, but also a tool that can either serve to advance or fight against a fascist agenda. That's explicit in Bastard's plot and its dialogue, but there are further subtextual layers worth parsing in repeat viewings. And that Tarantino can do all this while still injecting his trademark dialogue, love of B-movies, and exciting bursts of violence is all the more remarkable. Number 75, Inception. One challenge with my one film per director rule is dealing with filmmakers who are still active and very much in their prime. Case in point, Christopher Nolan, a director who's been working at an extremely high level for the last 20 years and genuinely seems to be getting better. Were it not for a fear of recency bias, I may well have put Oppenheimer here, but my heart ultimately went with Inception. The film is the perfect fusion of the two sides of Nolan, the helmer of tentpole blockbusters with spectacular effects and set pieces, and the maker of high-concept thrillers which function as puzzles. That was probably enough to lock Inception's placement in the top 100, but I won't deny the film also has a strong nostalgic pull for me. One of the greatest highlights of my teen years were frequent movie theater trips with my friends, and Inception has become a reservoir of those fond memories. This movie we saw in a big group where everyone floated out of the theater on a euphoric high, already making plans to see it again. Those experiences are special. But this isn't just blind nostalgia. We floated out of that theater because Inception really did rock, and those memories remain rose-tinted because the film has kept rocking on repeat viewings. Number 74, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. I used to have a bad attitude about musicals. The unreality of song and dance clashed with the vast majority of my cinematic vocabulary, and show tunes were a very hard sell to my heavy metal loving ears.
Fucking Slayer!
It took a lot of time for me to appreciate the genre, slowly but surely being won over by a series of movies which gradually eroded my shell. And the film that finally broke through and turned me around was The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. No doubt a large reason for this is the film's deep sense of melancholy. These weren't shiny happy faces putting on a show. This was aching loss and regret, and I was much better positioned to appreciate the gloomy than I was the glitzy. At the same time, though, the film is also bursting in color and beauty. Demi's pastel aesthetic a visual delight, even at the peak of our lover's lament. Love hurts, but the world goes on, in all its wonders and disappointments. Number 73, City of God. Freed from an American context, City of God brought an entirely different vision of organized crime to the screen, and did so with ferocious energy. The film tells a rather grim story of those born into poverty in Rio and the pervasive way crime and violence seeps into their lives. There's a bleakness to the film, a sense of inevitability further enforced by the in medias res opening and the fact that we know the entire film is building to a violent confrontation. But there's also tremendous excitement in the unique setting and the vibrance of the film's editing and visual style, both of which have proven influential since. Number 72, Sancho the Bailiff. A haunting fable of the lives torn apart in war. Sancho the Bailiff begins with the collapse of a governor's dynasty and the turmoil inflicted upon his family. Preyed upon by deceitful agents, mother is separated from her young children, who are in turn sold into slavery. The ensuing story is a fascinating tale of cruelty and survival, but what makes Sancho the Bailiff truly transcendent is how even Kenji Mitsuguchi's hand is. The content is grim, but Mitsuguchi does not wallow in cruelty. In fact, it's the acts of kindness that resonate most for me. Much as the film observes who suffers in crisis and at the hands of tyrants, it is also about how such forces are overcome, about a life beyond the grasp of evil. Number 71, Pink Floyd, The Wall. Am I conflating my love for the album The Wall with love for its film adaptation? Quite possibly. It's not a coincidence that I only really started to love this movie as the music went from something I respected to one of my favorite albums of all time and consistently played on repeat. On the other hand, There is no denying how much the film adds to the album's experience. Alan Parker's oppressive live-action segments and Gerald Scarfe's truly evocative animations converge with Pink Floyd's music into an utterly terrifying expression of subconscious rage and fear that seamlessly shifts from a psychological introspection of a fictional rock star protagonist to a broader rumination on the enduring legacy of post-war Britain as it sees a rising encroachment of fascism. It's a deeply upsetting watch, but one that does contain at least a sliver of a hope, that the wall can be torn down and something better built in its place. Maybe. Much of that power is also found on vinyl, but its expansion onto celluloid is essential and singular. Number 70, The Passion of Joan of Arc. The Passion of Joan of Arc was not the first movie to tell Joan of Arc's story, nor the last. Yet it still stands as the defining cinematic account of her life and legacy, and it's not particularly close. That's interesting given the film is actually a very stripped-down account of the final days of her life, as Joan endures trial at the hands of abusive church officials. Carl Theodor Dreyer's staging and the film's editing are so intense they border on viciousness, while Maria Falconetti gives quite possibly the greatest performance of the silent era. The power those eyes convey is unforgettable. The film is also a key example of how essential the work of composers retrospectively scoring silent classics are to keeping the silent era alive. The Passion of Joan of Arc is great to any sounds, but that Richard Einhorn score complements it perfectly. Number 69, Annie Hall. I considered leaving Annie Hall off the list given the accusations against Woody Allen, but realized doing so would be dishonest, a means to avoid an awkward discussion rather than an expression of my genuine feelings about the film in question. Because the simple fact is, I deeply love Annie Hall. The film firmly established Allen as the kind of acclaimed filmmaker whose movies would win Oscars, and those strengths are evident in the intelligence of the screenplay, the great sense of New York, and the excellent performances from a deep roster of talent, especially Diane Keaton, stellar in the titular role. But the film is also a piece with the more straightforward comedies Allen made in the early 70s, and that might well be its greatest strength. There is a looseness to Annie Hall, a willingness to go on a long tangent or break form in pursuit of a laugh, that not only results in some very funny scenes, but it also makes the film feel alive. Number 68, The Elephant Man. On the one hand, this is probably the most boring possible choice for a favorite David Lynch movie, the least representative of his style and the most in line with traditional prestige filmmaking. But on the other hand, The Elephant Man is also a masterpiece of craft, beautifully shot, beautifully designed, and sporting several amazing performances. It's also a film that makes me weep. That scene where John and Treves reunite is filmed simply, but its effect is overwhelming. I could literally feel myself welling up when I wrote this sentence, and I feel it again now as I recite it into a microphone. Number 67, Amadeus. It's crazy to think that a 3-hour epic about feuding classical composers wasn't just a critically acclaimed Best Picture winner, but also a box office smash in the middle of the 80s, and remains one of the most beloved films of the decade. Or maybe it's not so crazy. Amadeus certainly doesn't play like a stodgy costume drama or history lesson. It's vibrant and fun, way more entertaining than a movie routinely shown in middle schools has any right to be. The core of the film is Salieri's obsession with Mozart and his musical superiority, the film and F. Murray Abraham's performance communicating a potent mix of envy, hatred, and sincere awe.
What did you think of it yourself? Did you like it at all?
I thought it was marvelous.
It's one of the most unique character dynamics in film history, and one of the most compelling. Number 66, Midnight Cowboy. The story of Joe Buck and Rico Rizzo would work in any era, but only in the new Hollywood could Midnight Cowboy be made the way it was. John Schlesinger combines the New York avant-garde scene of the 60s, the plains of Texas, and the promise of Florida with neo-realist location shooting, Fellini-esque dream and fantasy sequences, method acting from unconventional-looking leading men, and French New Wave-influenced disjunctive editing. The film bringing the sensibilities of Euro art cinema to an iconically American setting and story. Midnight Cowboy should collapse under the sheer weight of these disparate styles, but somehow it instead coheres, as a moving story of two men finding love and friendship amidst the grinding obliteration of poverty. Number 65, Inside Llewyn Davis. The Coen brothers are masters of comedy and drama in equal measure, and that would seemingly make Fargo, the film that balances both in equal measure, the logical choice for this list. I considered that, and it's also one of the most acclaimed films they've ever made, so I doubt I'd receive much flack for that pick. But the more I thought about it, the more I found myself drifting towards Inside Llewyn Davis. Like Fargo, the film mixes comedy and drama, but it's much more low-key. The film has a humorous side, but it's not really going for laughs. There's drama, but, well, no one's getting fed to a wood chipper. And yet the whole is crept up as the most resonant fusion of the Coens' offbeat sensibilities, shades of nihilism, and love for their characters. This is a movie about slowly succumbing to the weight of life. And what makes it all the more impressive is how prickly a character Llewyn is. This is not the easiest guy to root for, but I challenge anyone to hear Oscar Isaac's simple delivery of "I'm tired" and not feel it in their soul.
I thought I just needed a night's sleep, but it's more than that.
Also, I'm realizing in editing that what put Inside Llewyn Davis over the top as my Coen pick was almost certainly The Cat. Number 64, The Conformist. The Conformist is an impressive movie no matter when you watch it. Georges Deleruy's beautiful score, Vittorio Storaro's exquisite cinematography, the impeccable staging of the climactic assassination, viscerally thrilling, and a perfect expression of Marcello's cowardice. There is a lot to love here. But I also won't pretend the story of a coward utterly capitulating to the demands of a fascist regime doesn't hit harder at a time where people and institutions are facing those same pressures, with many completely failing to meet the moment. Striving to be more courageous than Marcello is a good start. Number 63, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. A movie that has everything you could possibly want. Epic, sweeping adventure? Check. Young, passionate, lustful romance? Check. Old, wistful yearning, the kind of love that makes your heart ache? Oh, you better believe that's a check. And this is to say nothing of the staggering production value, or the touches of the fantastical, or the ass-kicking fight scenes. Ang Lee has created a film that provides spiritual nourishment, while also letting you cheer when a guy gets kicked in the face or thrown through a table. If that ain't movie magic, then I don't know what is. Number 62, Brazil. Brazil was not the first dystopian sci-fi movie. It wasn't even the first dystopian sci-fi movie released in the 1980s in a butchered form with an offensively awful happy ending awkwardly tacked on that reduced the story to a hackneyed romance that the rest of the film emphatically did not support. Not a lot. Weird that it happened twice. But what distinguishes Brazil, apart from Terry Gilliam's aggressively off-putting aesthetic, is how funny it is. Gilliam used to be a Python after all, and sure enough, Brazil zeroes in on the absurdity of its bureaucratic hellscape, where families are ripped apart by clerical errors and instruments of torture are wielded by unremarkable pencil pushers. I laugh, and then that ending, the film's real ending, hits, and I choke on my laughter. Number 61, Augury, The Wrath of God. Werner Herzog is arguably more acclaimed as a documentarian than he is a maker of narrative cinema, but he has at least one stone-cold classic under his belt, and that's Augury. That documentary background is evident too. Herzog doesn't shoot the conquistador's search for El Dorado like a historical epic. He shoots it as if he's really there in 1560, capturing the quest as it unfolds in front of him. The trip down the Amazon is a trip into madness, but what's truly chilling is how quiet Klaus Kinski portrays that descent. He is mad, but in the thick of madness, he's almost convincing. Number 60, Children of Men. The showy wonders and the memorable high concept of a world where there hasn't been a human birth in nearly 20 years are extremely enticing for young cinema goers just discovering a wider world of movies. They certainly were to my teenage self, but the film has also held up well into adulthood, primarily because the assured style and unique premise propel a story with some real substance. Alfonso Cuarón offers a portrait of a world on the brink of oblivion, going out not with a bang, but instead grinding down into silence. The film has only felt more prescient in the decades since, as we live through catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe, and the world goes on with the unconvincing veneer of business as usual. For that reason, Children of Men probably has a strong claim to being the movie of the 21st century thus far. Which is horribly depressing, but hey, at least the film's good. Number 59, Battleship Potemkin. Battleship Potemkin is the go-to film for students and aspiring cinephiles learning about Soviet montage, and I won't pretend my path to Eisenstein's most famous movie was any different. Well, come for the homework, stay for the blistering filmmaking. Potemkin is not just important for the time, it's still rousing. Eisenstein cuts with an urgency that is completely involving, transcending beyond technical achievement and into moving story of camaraderie in the face of oppression. When Grigory Vakulinchuk stands for the humanity of he and his peers, I'm basically ready to scream in my seat. Number 58, Akira. Widely cited as the film which helped break anime in the West and one of the most stylish, gorgeously animated films of all time, Akira is pretty close to being an undisputed masterpiece. The one common knock you'll sometimes hear is that the adaptation had to cut out mass chunks of the source manga, and the remaining film is pretty truncated. On some level, that is true. The manga is massive after all, but I also find it an oddly compelling strength. Every stray image or incidental character is so vivid and detailed that it feels like there's volumes of story we're only getting a glimpse of, because in a lot of cases there is. There is a depth and richness to the world that is always present, and that makes these staggering visual spectacle and imaginative set pieces all the more exciting. Number 57, Menace to Society. There's a tendency for young filmmakers to really show off their skills with elaborate wonders and complex set pieces when given the opportunity. That can sometimes read as obnoxious or juvenile, but when that unbridled ambition and energy is applied to the right material, the results can be quite impressive, and Menace to Society is one of those times. It blows my mind to think this movie was a first feature directed by a pair of 20-year-olds. It's so visually striking, and it moves with such confidence that surely they had to be seasoned veterans. On the other hand, of course this is a movie by 20-year-olds, in its willingness to flex its craft, sure, but also in the anger and urgency with which the Hughes brothers chronicle life in Watts, LA. For all the flash and style, there is also a harrowing despair to Menace to Society that builds to a devastating final scene. Number 56, McCabe and Mrs. Miller. This is another film that took me time to warm to, and in hindsight I do see why. The film is a western, but it's in no hurry to excite you with shootouts or bar fights, and Robert Altman's mumbly dialogue can be an alienating choice. But with every viewing, I find more to appreciate. From the revisionist critique of capitalism utterly bulldozing individuals, to the great titular characters, to Altman's rather complex portrait of burgeoning community, in all its virtue and vice. And while a far cry from a conventional western, that climactic cat-and-mouse chase / shootout is one of the genre's greatest set pieces. Plus, McCabe's coat is just one of the all-time bits of costume design. Immaculate. I wish I wore that every year all winter. Number 55, The Battle of Algiers. There are no Italian neorealist films in this list. That might be a mistake, and I might regret it when I get around to my long overdue Bicycle Thieves rewatch, but that's the way my top 100 shook out. As is, the most potent neorealist presence in my list is The Battle of Algiers. Set in Algeria in the 1950s, the film follows the revolutionary Ali Lepant and his allies as they fight against France's colonial occupation. Italian director Gillo Pontecorvo employs neorealist tactics like handheld cameras, location shooting in war-torn environments, and non-actors, and that does lend an immediacy and authenticity to the proceedings, essential to the film's gnawing tension and confrontational politics. This is not a safe depiction of straightforward good and evil. It is a messy and violent depiction of revolutionary conflict that nonetheless stands firmly on an anti-colonial message. Pontecorvo is also not totally beholden to his neorealist influences. Ennio Morricone's now iconic score adds a great deal of cinematic flair, as does the only professional actor in the cast, Jean Martin, whose conscious sense of performance is subtle, but distinctly felt in antagonist Colonel Philippe Mathieu. Number 54, Night of the Living Dead. That George A. Romero basically invented a new subgenre is a seismic achievement unto itself. There were technically zombies before, but they only barely resemble Romero's flesh eaters, and there were other precedents, but Night of the Living Dead still marked a turning point for horror cinema. But its placement here is less for being the first than for being the best.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
The film's scrappy roots are evident from its opening frame, from the simple composition to the classically B-movie score. But as the film builds its horror, any notions of quaintness give way to a disturbing revelation, that we are bearing witness to apocalypse. Not merely a violent crisis, but the ensuing collapse of humanity. Just more kindling for the fire. Number 53, The French Connection. I worry that context has reduced The French Connection's appeal. Cop on the edge is such a well-worn stereotype that Popeye Doyle almost looks cliché today. But he wasn't in 1971, and if time has dulled the film on paper, it has not in practice. The infamous car chase, captured with handheld cameras barreling through New York streets, is an all-timer all by itself, but the whole of the film is propelled by that intensity and intimacy, which keeps you on edge. It's a film driven by action, be it full-on set pieces or the quiet parts of the procedural, but it all lures you perfectly into Popeye's obsession. Number 52, The Social Network. David Fincher built his career with thrillers about serial killers, psychopaths, and elaborate set pieces where danger hung over every second. Funny that the most thrilling movie he ended up making was about the creation of a website. That's of course a glib description. The Social Network is also about friendship, betrayal, and the burgeoning tech billionaires that evolved into the current villains of the 21st century. But it's a testament to Fincher's growth as a filmmaker that he can make something so exciting without life and death stakes. Huge credit is owed to Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross for one of the greatest film scores of all time, but every technical element is just firing on all cylinders, as is an exquisitely assembled cast of young talent, many of which giving their career best performance. I'm also not sure if there's any line of dialogue in film in the last 20 years more prescient than Erica's summation of Mark Zuckerberg.
You're gonna go through life thinking that girls don't like you because you're a nerd. And I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that that won't be true. It'll be because you're an asshole.
Number 51, Harakiri. The number one film on the official Letterboxd top 250 movies of all time. Whatever else you can say about that community, it does not lack for taste. It's not totally surprising Harakiri would top the favorites of hardcore film nerds, as it's pretty much unassailable. The film looks amazing and features a handful of incredible set pieces that could be called action scenes, even if the film itself is really more of a drama. And that drama is enthralling. The film's screenplay is a masterclass in structure and how to reveal information to your audience. Beneath the riveting plot is a weighty, revisionist samurai epic that deconstructs the supposed virtue of the genre and the historical institution of the samurai more broadly. But you don't have to get lost in those weeds if you don't want to. The movie still absolutely cooks as a rich story of highly motivated, clashing characters, anchored by a brilliant performance from Japanese film icon Tetsuya Nakada. And to cap it all off, while the film is beloved, it's not so widely seen that standing it has become uncool. Well, I've never had any illusions of being cool, so I have it at 51 rather than 1, but that's nothing to sneeze at. Number 50, Frankenstein. A lot of people will tell you that Bride of Frankenstein is the true crown jewel of the Universal Monsters catalog, and I see where they're coming from. It's generally flashier and has an oddball tone that I really get with. But there's an eeriness to James Whale's first Frankenstein that always lures me back. The aesthetics of misty graveyards, mad scientist labs, and gothic castles, not to mention the monster's makeup, are so ingrained in horror history that I doubt many modern viewers will be scared by this movie, but you never know. There's a starkness to Whale's visual style I find highly unnerving, and for all that has been changed from Mary Shelley, the source novel's themes of science free of ethical constraints and the violence of the mob still resonate rather powerfully. Whale, a gay man, also injects a heavy dose of queer subtext, which only becomes more prevalent and more rewarding the more you think about it. Frankenstein is not a perfect movie, far from it in fact, but it achieves at such a high level that it frankly doesn't matter. Number 49, This Is Spinal Tap. Alright, look, I know I said no documentaries, but I had to make an exception for Marty DeBurgi's chronicle of legendary heavy metal band Spinal Tap. The film is an unvarnished expose of both the band's personal lives and their artistry, providing insight into their most iconic tunes and eras, and glimpses of the sensitive side we almost never see.
Well, this piece is called Lick My Love Pump.
The film also bravely subverts the tropes of your typical concert movie. While we get plenty of performances that do rock, Spinal Tap are also not afraid to show themselves at their most vulnerable, as technical gaffes and a dwindling audience derail the band. But what is tragedy without triumph? If you aren't cheering in your seat when Spinal Tap reunite for an amazing show in Kobe Hall, then I'm gonna be real with you, you're probably a piece of shit. Number 48, The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Since the Western has existed, the genre has been interested in deflating its own myths, shedding light on the violence Western conquest was built upon and the interplay of history and legend. The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford is a proud entry in this tradition. The film is all about the folk hero mythos Jesse James constructed about himself, securing his own legacy as the walls closed in before his death. That's the hook anyway, but the more time goes by, the more it's James's assassin, the coward Robert Ford, that truly captivates me. This sad man desperate for a glory of his own, discarded by his idol and used by the police. The film's wistful cinematography and morose music lend an elegiac tone that you naturally assume is for Jesse given we're building to his titular assassination. But then that assassination occurs, and we get a whole other act exploring Ford's later life, and the full scope of the tragedy comes into focus. Both men are destined to die, but only one will be mourned. Number 47, The Cranes Are Flying. I feel like I could just show a 30-second montage of different shots from The Cranes Are Flying, and that would be sufficient justification for its placement in the list. The cinematography is nothing less than astonishing, with luminous imagery and a mobile camera which expresses both the free-flowing joy of romance and the chaos as Boris and Veronica's lives are torn apart by war. And that's what really clenches The Cranes Are Flying as one of my favorite movies. Its technical achievements are in the service of a moving human story, a tale of the people caught in war's grip, rather than the heroes and villains who fight them. Number 46, Princess Mononoke. Animation has long been a great sight for fantasy cinema. The filmmakers unbound by the limitations of physical reality and free to let their imaginations run wild. Princess Mononoke is not necessarily the most abundantly imaginative animated fantasy film, even in just Miyazaki's own filmography. Spirited Away likely tops it in terms of quantity of creatures and places. But Mononoke is still unquestionably my favorite, and one of the greatest fantasy movies ever made. Ashitaka's quest to remove a demon's curse smartly brings us into a dense, richly developed world, slowly giving us glimpses of the people, creatures, and social relations which tether them all, and it does so while largely avoiding lengthy exposition dumps. Miyazaki intrigues us before he explains, and as rich as the world is, it's the richness of the characters and their conflicts which most compels me. Ashitaka's quest to free himself, Princess Mononoke's protection of the forest and the wolf tribe who took her in, Lady Eboshi's industrial expansion and destruction of the forest to advance her own community. These are thoughtful, highly motivated, and articulate characters. It's that clash of ideologies that gives Princess Mononoke's story such resonance, and its world such tangibility. Number 45, Woman in the Dunes. A man from the city finds himself cast into an inescapable pit. His only companion, a woman who works shoveling sand for her captors. So begins Woman in the Dunes, and that surreal nightmare scenario is one hell of a hook. Early sections cover protagonist Nicky's efforts to escape the pit and how powerless Nicky is against his captors. But as the film continues, something disturbing starts to happen. You feel Nicky give up. The pit becomes as much a mental prison as it is a physical one, more even, and the film an exploration of a man sinking into the depths of depression. No, not just sinking into depression, a man being forced into one by those profiting off his hopelessness. It is a bleak tale of how the human spirit is whittled away by craven opportunists who can exploit that suffering, and while undeniably grim, there's also a real beauty and strange eroticism in how the film is constructed. Number 44, The Wages of Fear. And speaking of movies about vulnerable people exploited by a ruling class, the sheer premise of The Wages of Fear is compelling. A collection of desperate expats in an impoverished North African town are contracted by an oil company to drive trucks full of nitroglycerin up winding, dangerous, unpaved roads to put out an oil fire. That long drive occupies the bulk of the movie, and it is fist-in-your-mouth anxiety-inducing. So many scenes are built around the men desperately trying to overcome the terrain, but even the relatively safe stretches of road are perilous, with one wrong move spelling disaster. It's a film where human life is extremely fragile, bolstered by an extended first act where we get to know the men and the circumstances which motivate them to take such insane work. Number 43, The Last Picture Show. Desolation, sexual fumbling, and generational conflict on the plains of a small Texas town. I think what I love most about The Last Picture Show is Peter Bogdanovich's sense of restraint. At a time when Hollywood cinema was awash in images of rebellion and turmoil, Picture Show taps into a more pervasive dreariness. There is no single source for pain. Rich or poor, tended to by parents or abandoned by them, all the kids are just as confused and uncertain. And the adults are not so different. Despite its reputation as a youth movie, most of the adult cast are just as richly developed and complex as their younger counterparts. And counterpart is indeed the operable word. There really are no adults, just a collection of lonely people slowly resigned to the fact that the dreams they had for themselves probably won't come to fruition. That might sound depressing, and this is indeed a deeply melancholic film, but there is a kind of hope in shared misery. However lonely the characters may feel, they aren't actually alone. Number 42, The Lord of the Rings Trilogy. Yes, I'm cheating and including all 3 Lord of the Rings movies, and this won't be the last cheat of this nature. No doubt this will also annoy my podcast co-host, but you can't force me to pick a favorite Rings movie, so don't even try. Besides, the trilogy was produced in tandem and flow cohesively as a singular work, and it's in that context that the full scope of Peter Jackson and Company's achievement really comes into light. That Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens managed to take Tolkien's dense fantasy world and make it not just palatable to a mainstream audience who don't know their Tom Bombadils from their Hob Haywards, but rousing entertainment is a towering accomplishment. The cast is near perfect from top to bottom, the visual effects seamlessly blend the practical and the digital, the craft is simply sublime. Are there nits to be picked here and there? No doubt. But the totality of The Lord of the Rings is undeniable. Number 41, Heat. A tragic love story about two soulmates inexorably drawn together, yet inevitably destined to be alone. No one understands you better than your enemy. Neil and Vincent don't actually share much screen time in Heat, but De Niro and Pacino make the most of their minutes together, with those final seconds especially being profoundly moving despite how little is said. The film also has one of the greatest shootouts in the history of cinema, so there's that. Number 40, The 400 Blows. The filmmaker makes coming-of-age movie about their own thinly veiled adolescence is a popular subgenre, especially in recent memory. I'm not sure if The 400 Blows was the first film of this kind, but it's definitely the best. Unlike some of his Nouvelle Vague peers, Francois Truffaut does not employ new wave techniques to deconstruct cinematic form, but more simply to liberate his own filmmaking. There's a free-flowing looseness to The 400 Blows that's a joy to behold, and the ease with which Truffaut shifts from youthful revelry to melancholy feels wholly authentic to adolescence. Number 39, The Third Man. A perfect fusion of pulp noir and the legitimate hardships of post-war Europe in style and substance. The canted angles and shadowy cinematography are classic noir, while that zither score is a unique flourish that really loans the film a sense of intrigue. But the backdrop of the action is a Vienna still actively reeling from the violence of World War II. The scars are very present, not only in the traumatized city residents, but also the literal rubble which is found in abundance. We are constantly reminded of the war, and that makes C-tier pulp novelist Holly Martins such a great protagonist. Holly, an American with a naively simplistic worldview which mirrors his books, only barely understands the war and is fundamentally ill-equipped to engage with its consequences. Conversely, there's the film's iconic villain Harry Lime, who can be a real bastard, but one who understands the world he lives in only too well. Number 38, Phantom of the Paradise. There's generally two camps when it comes to Brian De Palma. Those that love the braggadocious machismo of his gangster films, especially Scarface, and the hardcore cinephiles who love his perverse, Hitchcock-inspired thrillers. And I will satisfy precisely none of them by picking Phantom of the Paradise as De Palma's best movie. The structure and recognizability of stories like Phantom of the Opera, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and Faust provides a durable structure for De Palma to just cut loose stylistically. The film is full of inventive and intricate uses of split screen, long flowing tracking shots, and elaborate set pieces, and it's all just a blast to watch. And that alone would make Phantom of the Paradise good, even great, but what makes it truly exquisite is the soundtrack of original music, perfectly suited to the story's mix of the operatic and the pulpy. The songs were written by Paul Williams, who also plays the wonderfully slimy, yet still somehow likable villain Swan, and I genuinely think the man should have won an honorary Oscar for his contributions to the film. Never before or since has someone written a collection of banger tunes for a movie while also giving a show-stealing villain performance.
What day is it?
Thursday. Today is Thursday. Breakfast.
Number 37, The Silence of the Lambs. I have no idea how a guy who specialized in energetic comedies about oddballs and misfits, and also the best concert film ever made the defining serial killer movie since Psycho, but I'm sure glad Jonathan Demme did. The Silence of the Lambs' legacy is evident in the lineage of procedurals and genius serial killer villains that spawned in its wake, but even if no movies followed its lead, I'm certain Lambs would still be one of my favorite movies. Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter are simply two of the great film characters, and watching their layers and psychology peeled back in a series of expertly written conversations is immensely pleasurable. Demme's craft is also excellent, not just in big showy scenes like Lecter's Escape, but in quiet moments. constantly keeping us on edge, on slight alert alongside Clarice. This is the movie every Hollywood thriller aspires to be. Number 36, La Dolce Vita. A decadent, sprawling journey through Rome's high-class nightlife told through the eyes of tabloid journalist Marcello Rubini. If you want to, you can enjoy the film as just that, as a vicarious entry point into the sweet life of wealth and leisure, with Fellini's sensual camera and Nino Rota's playful score making that life as delicious as possible. But there is more going on here. Marcello may have access to this lifestyle as a journalist, but he isn't actually a part of it, and he's ultimately engaging as vicariously as the viewer, and that loans the film, for all its pleasures, a sense of circling emptiness. It's an inquiry of meaning and purpose in the face of hedonism, and a rather bleak one at that, even as it's blinding you with glamour and indulgence. Number 35, Sweet Smell of Success. Like Fellini's Sweet Life, Sweet Smell of Success is another journey through hip urban sprawl, but this one is so much more cutthroat. Virtually every character is a crass manipulator, scheming to their own ends, and that moral bankruptcy emerges in some of the most ruthless and bizarre dialogue ever written for a Hollywood movie.
Conjugate me a verb, for instance, to promise. You promise to break up that romance. When?
You want something done, JJ, but I doubt if you yourself know what's involved.
I'm a schoolboy. Teach me, teach me.
Cat's in a bag and the bag's in a river.
Don't be a two-time loser, Sidney. The penalty could be severe. I like Harry, but I can't deny he sweats a little.
That's the charming street urchin face. Dallas, your mouth is as big as a basket and twice as empty.
My right hand hasn't seen my left hand in 30 years.
I'll do it.
I just love listening to these guys talk. Much of the film's pleasure comes from its screenplay, but Alexander McKendrick more than rises to the occasion, shooting New York City with style, and that feels even better thanks to a great jazzy score. Number 34, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. The corrupting influence of greed is a popular theme in fiction, and while The Treasure of the Sierra Madre did not introduce that theme to the movies, I still think it's my favorite iteration of the theme on film. The opening minutes, which establish Dobbs and Curtin's poverty, are crucial in communicating the desperation which fuels their search for gold in the Sierra Madre's mountains. It's real easy to like these guys from the start, even more so when they hook up with a kooky prospector, and John Huston's blurring of adventure, westerns, and even noir amplify our rooting for the boys. And that makes the gradual degradation of their souls all the more gutting. Huston does not announce his film as a morality play, but it sneaks up on you until it becomes all-consuming. That descent also provided Hollywood icon Humphrey Bogart one of his greatest showcases, a hardened man's man we easily root for, but also someone with undeniable darkness in his heart. Number 33, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. Made in the thick of World War II, Powell and Pressburger's decade-spanning epic explores the life of Clive Candy, a fictional British military man as he ascends the ranks, starting during the Second Boer War at the turn of the century up to the encroaching threat of Nazism. Candy is himself a richly drawn character brought to life warmly by Richard Livesey, and the film treats him with a lot of nuance, admiring his ideals while acknowledging his fundamental naivete. It's a character study that's rewarding on its own terms, but even more so knowing this was made during the war, and is as much about Candy as it is a nation examining their own history in light of the crisis at hand. It's a beautiful film, proud without being nationalistic, wistful while being clear-eyed. And for all the serious issues and uncertain questions the film raises, it's its warmth that I remember most vividly. Number 32, The Before Trilogy. More cheating, and not one I can justify with the "it was all just one production" loophole I used for Lord of the Rings. Literally the exact opposite. Each Before movie was separated by almost a decade. But it's that duration that makes the trilogy so special. The long passage of time between entries is a feature, not a bug, with each new entry reflecting on what that gap has meant, expanding the characters and deepening previous chapters. Before Sunrise introduces Jesse and Celine, and captures a perfect mix of hip cynicism with a genuine young love that is deeply romantic. before Sunset picks up again 9 years later, with characters who are older and more guarded. It's still romantic, but that romance has been tempered by the encroaching realities of adulthood. Love wins out for now, but the world isn't quite so simple, and by the time we get to Before Midnight, the fairy tale romance has shifted into domestic normalcy, and not entirely blissful domesticity at that. Each chapter is great on its own merits, but it's as a shared story of love and its evolution through time that the full brilliance of the films becomes apparent. Number 31, The Royal Tenenbaums. The evolution of Wes Anderson's career has been akin to the development of a dollhouse. With each new film, the dollhouse becomes more detailed, more intricate, more purely the product of imagination rather than any reflection of reality. I've loved this evolution personally. I love seeing the dollhouse develop film after film, but my personal Wes of choice comes early in his career, when he still had one foot in our reality as well as his own. The Tenenbaum household is an island of misfits amidst a heightened but otherwise tangible New York City, and that contrast further emphasizes the family's quirks. Beyond that, I just really love all these characters. It's my favorite Anderson ensemble by a pretty wide margin, anchored by a brilliant performance from Gene Hackman, possibly his career best, and I do not say that lightly. There are multiple scenes that bring me to tears and that make me laugh so hard I can hardly breathe, sometimes both in the space of a minute. And if all that weren't enough, The Royal Tenenbaums is also the site for some of the best needle drops in film history.
Go, Mordecai!
Number 30, LA Confidential. One thing you'll quickly notice if you watch the classic Hollywood film noirs is that their plots rarely held up under any scrutiny. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as those films are propelled more by character and style than plot, but it is worth noting. I bring this up because it still boggles my mind that noir descendant LA Confidential holds together as tight as a drum. This is a movie with dozens of named characters, 3 different protagonists, and a twisting narrative which crosses personal intrigue and political corruption, all based on a dense 500-page novel by James Ellroy. And it doesn't just work, it's exciting at every step. I'm tempted to call the film's success a miracle, but there's nothing miraculous about it. It's just really good filmmaking. The result of everyone, screenwriters, cast, technicians, working their asses off to make a great movie. Despite being made in the 90s, LA Confidential harkens back to the classical studio mode of supremely satisfying storytelling fundamentals, right down to director Curtis Hanson being more of an anonymous craftsman than an auteur. But a film this good is hard to argue with. Number 29, 12 Angry Men. The best film from the best film year, and a masterclass in how much drama can be mined from simplicity. You'd think a movie that consists pretty well entirely of old men arguing in a room would be the kind of film you'd have to work to appreciate. But nope. 12 Angry Men is actually a poster child for onboarding newcomers onto classic cinema. An invigorating and genuinely inspiring movie. Number 28, The Night of the Hunter. A bizarre anomaly. Sort of a fairy tale and sort of a nightmare. With a villain that is both deeply terrifying and deeply pathetic. Is it a noir? Is it a horror movie? Is it a fable? Southern Gothic? The Night of the Hunter defies easy classification, and the fact that it was the only film Charles Laughton ever directed makes it all the more singular an object. And oh, what an object it is. The film is one of the defining arguments for the artistry of black and white cinematography, awash in visuals that just wouldn't be possible with color. There are dozens of images here permanently burned into my retinas. Less iconic but also awesome is the music, from the gentle lullaby Pearl sings as she and her brother drift down the river to that bulldozing main theme. The film is a pure aesthetic treat, one built around an odd but oddly compelling story and an all-timer performance from Robert Mitchum.
Sometimes I think poor old John might make it to heaven yet.
Number 27, The Searchers. There are John Ford movies that I think are more perfect than The Searchers, and I did consider some of them, but no Ford movie, possibly no other movie, period, obsesses me like The Searchers does. The film exemplifies a lot of Ford's strengths: rich cinematography, muscular filmmaking, rousing action, excellent John Wayne performance, and the storytelling fuses nuance and intelligence with accessible Hollywood entertainment. But there's also a darkness that goes beyond even the best and most introspective Ford films, an imperfect but honest inquiry into the heart of white supremacy. Ethan Edwards is one of the most openly monstrous protagonists to ever come out of a Hollywood movie, an unambiguous racist, fearful of race mixing and seeking no less than the extermination of indigenous people. The film condemns these attitudes, most explicitly in the contrast between Ethan and the younger, more virtuous Martin, who is himself part indigenous. But the film also betrays a racism of its own, in its casting, in some of its visuals, in its comic relief. It's a film which understands how racist hatred has hollowed Ethan's soul, yet it can't fully conceptualize indigenous people as people. There's still props in Ethan's story. I've heard The Searchers described as an anti-racist movie made by a racist, and I think that's accurate, or at least it speaks to the contradictory feelings the film stirs. And that's also what makes The Searchers fascinating. Unlike more ostensibly progressive and positive anti-racist texts, The Searchers is not trying to solve racism, nor is it a moralistic weep over how sad it is we can't all just get along. Instead, Ford sits with white supremacy in all its horrid ugliness. Ethan might spare Debbie at the 11th hour, but the raw wound at the film's core remains gaping. Number 26, Lawrence of Arabia. The word epic gets thrown around a lot, but one of the few movies that truly warrants that label is Lawrence of Arabia. Hell, the film outright demands it. Lots of CinemaScope movies in the 50s and 60s attained a sense of bigness through clashing armies and thousands of extras, and Lawrence has them, and they look great, but they're also swallowed by the sheer vastness of the desert. Rather than try and blow your mind with elaborate sets and immaculately dressed sound stages, Lawrence of Arabia lets the inherent beauty of the world speak for itself. And for such a gargantuan superproduction, the man at its center is rather enigmatic and idiosyncratic. Here, David Lean's background making intimate character dramas comes to the fore. Lawrence of Arabia may be many times bigger than Your Brief Encounters, but it's motivated by the same curiosity about people and their complexities. Number 25, Sherlock Jr. From one of the longest movies on the list to easily the shortest. I'm on the record as being a fan of long movies, but in this case, Sherlock Jr.'s brevity is essential to its greatness. Buster Keaton's short films frequently showcased impossible gags, visual jokes that broke reality but made an intuitive sense. But as the man transitioned to feature films, he found it more important to maintain a plausible reality, and a lot of these gags fell to the wayside. Enter Sherlock Jr., which at 45 minutes combines the best of both worlds. It's long enough to develop its scenario of a projectionist dreaming his way into the movie he's showing, but also loose enough to not be so concerned with maintaining reality. The dream story leans further into the fantastical, in fact, with some really mind-bending gags where Buster finds himself materializing into the film within the film and having to navigate the world while it cuts around him. It's genius comedy, and to that point, I distinctly remember attending a screening of Sherlock Jr. with dozens of first-year film students who were in the throes of laughter. Seeing young film students loving a silent comedy classic genuinely filled me with hope. Of course, 2 days later the pandemic started, so all that hope went to shit, but hey, it was a nice couple days. Number 24, Unforgiven. Clint Eastwood has contributed a lot to cinema, as both actor and director, but if I could only keep one of his movies, my pick would unquestionably be Unforgiven. That's a bit ironic given how inseparable the film is from Eastwood's greater filmography, a summation of the man's legacy playing killers. We never see Will Money's old life running with a gang, but the cultural memory of young Clint blowing bad guys away fills in that gap and gives resonance to Will's regret. But even in an alternate universe where Unforgiven is the only movie Eastwood ever made, it's still one of the greatest westerns of all time. A classically made tale of a man trying to escape his past, only to realize he never really changed. It's tragic when Will takes to drink again and becomes a Grim Reaper of the Plains. But it's also exhilarating. It's hard not to feel your own trigger finger itching for some action, and the way Unforgiven scratches that itch while confronting our desire for it is very sophisticated. Number 23, Raiders of the Lost Ark. If adventure has a name, it must be Indiana Jones. Admittedly, that's actually a tagline first used for Temple of Doom, but hey, truth in advertising. Indy is the ultimate macho fantasy, a capable action hero, a handsome ladies' man, even an academic, all brought to life with effortless charm by Harrison Ford at peak movie stardom. It's easy to take this kind of performance for granted, but that Indiana Jones feels like a cohesive character rather than a collection of wish fulfillment fantasies is a testament to Ford's skills. Also important, the guy spends huge chunks of Raiders being humbled, ass-kicked, and one-upped, which is essential in keeping him relatable despite being so impossibly awesome. I love this guy, and Raiders is his best outing, a perfectly oiled entertainment machine that keeps topping itself with intrigue and action. I could fill this slot by just listing all the parts I love. The opening mini-adventure, the first tease of Toe, the meeting with Marion and subsequent bar fight, the market fight with the sword guy, the saluting monkey, the beam in the map room, the punch-out to propeller death, the truck chase, the infiltration, the head-melting finale. The list just goes on and on and on. Few filmmakers can capture a sense of fun like Steven Spielberg, and none of his films are more fun than Raiders of the Lost Ark. Number 22, Nosferatu. The original, to be clear, though I love the remakes. I love lots of Dracula adaptations, really, but Murnau's is still the best. Yes, I am fun at parties. Where the cabinet of Dr. Caligari imagined a world of horror, Nosferatu imagines the horror that exists in our world. It's a film that looks into the dark, old, and abandoned places to find the evil which still lurks within. In stripping Bram Stoker's novel down to its bones, Nosferatu offers the simplest distillation of horror, a boogeyman who preys upon the innocent. Simplicity should not imply a lack of depth, though. Count Orlok is evocative of more abstract fears. The control the rich possess over the workers, sexual violence, fear of the other, but by leaving these in subtext, the film allows viewers to project what scares them onto the monster, and thus can operate at a more primal level of horror. Number 21, Modern Times. The arrival of the talkies in 1927 prompted an immediate overhaul in Hollywood filmmaking as the industry pivoted to sound. By the 30s, the silent movie, the standard of the art form for 30 years, had become archaic. But some filmmakers refused to let the past die. With one superstar being massive enough, he actually could still make silent movies. That filmmaker, of course, being Charlie Chaplin. Modern Times is not technically a silent movie. It uses synchronized sound in a couple of key moments, but it functions as a silent movie in its storytelling and style of comedy. Sound is explicitly positioned as a tool used to oppress and abuse workers, and when the tramp has to sing, he sings in a universal language of gibberish. That Modern Times acts as a kind of epilogue to the silent cinema imbues it with a greater sense of poignancy, but the film is also more simply a powerful expression of Chaplin's artistry, aesthetically and thematically, a plea for humanity in an increasingly mechanized world, delivered earnestly and with good humor. Number 20, The Fly. It's insane to think that David Cronenberg, the guy who makes psychosexual body horror movies directly engaging with media theory, had an honest-to-God mainstream hit movie in 1986, and that he did so without compromising his own artistry. Such is the magic of The Fly, a film which takes the premise of the fun 1958 movie of the same name and delivers a profoundly uncomfortable experience. The film is less prone to abstractions than your Videodromes or your Existenzes, but it's still fundamentally Cronenbergian in its obsession with the flesh and bodily decay. The famous makeup effects are top-notch and essential to the film's success, but more fundamental still is the empathy Cronenberg shows his characters. Seth's transformation into Brundlefly is gross because of the effects, but it's scary because of how much we identify with Seth. And Veronica, helplessly watching as someone she loves dies. The Fly is my favorite horror movie, but my strongest emotion watching the film is not fear, it's sadness. Something Cronenberg punctuates with one of the most gut-punch endings ever put to film. Number 19, Chinatown. Speaking of gut-punch endings, a lot of what makes Chinatown significant is how it reinterprets the classic film noir, set in sun-drenched LA rather than urban jungles cast in darkness, with a femme fatale who is a victim rather than villainess, and a detective hero whose principles are a weakness rather than a virtue. Polanski even casts John Huston, director of The Maltese Falcon, widely seen as the forefather of film noir, as Chinatown's villain, and a rather monstrous villain at that. These elements are thoughtfully integrated and fun to parse, but you don't have to be a genre theorist to enjoy Chinatown. The film is, more simply, one of the most assured pieces of storytelling ever brought to the screen. Robert Towne's screenplay masterfully plants seeds for a political conspiracy that bubbles under the surface of the personal mystery Gittes is investigating until the two suddenly start to converge, narratively linked and thematically mirrored. The dialogue is also exquisite, a more muted form of the genre's hard-boiled witticisms.
There's no point in getting tough with me.
I don't get tough with anyone, Mr. Gittes. My lawyer does.
You must really think I'm stupid, don't you, Gittes?
I don't think about it that much, but give me a day or two and I'll get back to you. You accusing me of extortion?
Absolutely.
I don't think I need a day or two. You're dumber than you think I think you are. I goddamn near lost my nose, and I like it. I like breathing through it. And I still think that you're hiding something.
And that ending. An ending Town had to be talked into and fought against. But it's the only ending Chinatown ever could have had. Number 18, The Matrix. No, not even being claimed by the worst and most ignorant dipshits in the world can kill my love for The Matrix. Just as George Lucas folded pulp science fiction, westerns, and samurai flicks to create Star Wars, Lana and Lily Wachowski melded noir, anime, and Hong Kong action cinema to create their own cyberpunk epic. The inspirations are clear, but the resulting film is still singular, combining disparate sources into a cohesive blast of intrigue and excitement, shifting from weighty considerations on perception and reality to indulgently awesome shootouts and fight scenes. I've whittled away more hours of my life watching The Matrix than almost any other movie in my lifetime, and I look forward to whittling away more still. Depending on my mood, I can go to the film for its terrifying visions of a techno nightmare, its story of carving your own identity in the face of a system forcing you to be something else, and as a movie where a guy whips another guy's ass with one hand behind his back. Number 17, Once Upon a Time in the West. The greatest Western ever made. A compendium of the genre's archetypes, cliches, and imagery elevated to operatic heights. Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy had always fused scrappy B-movie aesthetics with the language of prestige epics, and Once Upon a Time in the West marked the culmination of that fusion. The film is a pulpy story of a mysterious stranger seeking vengeance, colliding with a story of ownership and property, and who shapes the expansion and development of America. The film is technically smaller than The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but it doesn't feel that way. The imagery is too momentous. The score, Ennio Morricone's best Yes, I Said It, too beautiful. The simplicity of the story is also a strength, providing the scaffolding for a Western epic and a rumination on power, but also being simple enough that plot can take a backseat to style. Leone famously was making Westerns before he had ever set foot in America, And while Once Upon a Time in the West was actually shot in the country, even using iconic American locations like Monument Valley, it is also the epitome of the Western as historical myth. Number 16, Sunset Boulevard. Hollywood has a long history of movies about how shitty and awful they are, and the masterpiece of this type is Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard. The story of an aging silent film star who's become a delusional recluse buried under her own wealth makes some immediate points about the damaging isolation of stardom and how idols can easily be cast away by the industry and their fans, but that's just the starting point. There are all sorts of subtle details the film doesn't bring attention to, but expands its cynical view of the industry, like the gender double standard where Norma Desmond is over the hill and washed up, while Cecil B. DeMille, who's actually about a decade older than Norma, is still helming tentpole films. That takes an even stronger meta quality if you see some of the films DeMille was making by that point in real life, which, yikes. But it's not just age. Our glimpses of contemporary filmmaking suggest it's all junk. Joe is a hack screenwriter working on some dopey nonsense. Sheldrake is a clueless producer whose approach to movies is entirely artless. Norma may be out of touch and vain, but she at least cares, and her cinema seems a lot more artistic than these bozos. Indeed, Norma is great.
I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
One of the great film characters, brought to life by a truly one-of-a-kind performance by Gloria Swanson. But William Holden and Erich von Stroheim aren't exactly slouches either. That all is probably enough, but Sunset Boulevard is also a shared favorite of my fiancé and I, and that makes it that extra bit special. Number 15, Metropolis. Stray clips of Metropolis will immediately make clear how influential the film has been to science fiction. This movie is almost 100 years old, but its images of a techno cityscape still tower over the collective cinematic imagination, and rightfully so. It isn't just that the visuals are themselves iconic, creative, brilliantly realized on a technical level, though, take note of all that, but how the film uses the city as a site for exploring inequality. The wonders of Metropolis are made possible by workers, toiling in a mechanical hellscape and literally swallowed by the machinery. That Fritz Lang employs a touch of pure fantasy allows Metropolis to transcend hard sci-fi and become more poetic. The film also ramps up to a pretty exhilarating final act, so spectacular it apparently brought Studio UFA to the brink of bankruptcy. Don't feel bad, Fritz. It was worth every penny. Or Reichsmark. Number 14, There Will Be Blood. One of the most hypnotically watchable movies ever made. Daniel Plainview alone commands attention, both in terms of Daniel Day-Lewis's performance, which even the endless superlatives rain down upon it don't quite convey the magnitude of what he does here, but also the character himself. The guy is not just a capitalist in the literal sense, but an avatar of capitalism, a force of ruthless expansion conquering and consuming the land. Human relationships cannot simply be. They must be weaponized, a further tool in the pursuit of profit and expansion of empire. But Daniel is also human, and broken in half by his personal need for family and companionship, conflicting with his role as a vessel for capitalism. He is a jagged, fractured man, and appropriately, There Will Be Blood is a jagged and fractured epic. It is grand and vast, but also dark and frightening, with a score that evokes an unimaginable evil. Number 13, His Girl Friday. I could make a case for His Girl Friday's progressive gender politics, or its breakneck pacing, or its iconic performances, or as the peak of Howard Hawks' themes and sensibilities. And that is all important, but it's also all secondary to a simpler deciding factor.
I can see her now. White head, lavender and old lace. Can't you see her, Bruce?
Yes, I can.
She's old, isn't she?
I think this is the funniest movie of all time.
How you doing? Got enough air?
Not very much.
That better? You're sitting pretty.
And every time I see it,
Oh, good evening, madam. Now listen, you 10-cent glamour girl, you can't keep Butch away from his duty.
I somehow laugh even more.
Wait, just a minute. There's only one question I want to know.
What?
Walter.
What?
The mayor's first wife. What was her name?
You mean the one with the wart on her?
Right.
Fanny. What do you say, Duffy?
Number 12, Vertigo. Alfred Hitchcock is one of the most entertaining filmmakers to ever live, and you'd have to be a total pretentious jack-off to say your favorite Hitchcock movie is the somber mood piece, rather than his set-piece-driven tales of wrong men and murders. Anyway, Vertigo is my favorite Hitchcock movie. A lot of the man's major themes, like voyeurism and sexual fantasy, are very much at play here, but he's traded in excitement for a more evasive sense of intrigue. The pacing is slower, the hero increasingly malicious, and while there is a mystery to solve, it's ultimately more about the psychology of the characters than it is the plot. It's not surprising the film tanked back in 1958, but it's equally unsurprising that Vertigo has survived, emerging as a leading pick for Hitchcock's masterpiece. It's just so psychologically rich, and bolstered still by pristine picture and sound. That much of the material involving Scotty's projection of sexual fantasy and subjugation of his object of desire functions in part as confessional for the director, makes the film all the more disturbing and all the more compelling. Number 11, Do the Right Thing. A common logline on Do the Right Thing is how sadly well the film has aged. Police violence against black people and protest in response, the subconscious racism of supposed allies exploding when they feel threatened, the importance of equitable representation, the ways in which race relations are inevitably mediated by capital. These are all as salient in the 2020s as they were in 1989, and that likely won't change anytime soon. That's all true, and a testament to how perceptive Do the Right Thing was and is, but to focus solely on this timelessness sells Spike Lee short. Do the Right Thing succeeds just as fully as a hangout movie with a deep roster of memorable characters as it does a serious sociological statement. Throw on any random scene, and I guarantee you'll find a conversation that is funny, or poignant, or heartbreaking, or even just an amusing tangent. There is such a well-developed sense of community. Aiding all this is Spike, still young and hungry, injecting so much energy through his writing and direction. It's a film that feels alive, and it's that quality, even more so than the film's continued socio-political relevance, that has given Do the Right Thing such perpetual relevancy. Number 10, Days of Heaven. I'm not sure I can articulate why I love Days of Heaven so much. Terrence Malick has made films I'd consider more complex, more cinematically audacious, with more bizarre and unique characters. But something about Days of Heaven just clicks with me on a deeper emotional level. Set in the early 1910s, the film is a love triangle of sorts where lovers working on the farm of a terminally ill bachelor hatch a scheme where they will pose as brother and sister so that she can marry the farmer and inherit his wealth when he croaks. It's an intriguing setup, and the film does mine both melodrama and tension from it, especially as the farmer just keeps on living. But Malick is less concerned with the salacious three-way than he is using that dynamic to ruminate on human nature. The bartering of Abby is an extension of a worldview built around possession. Not just questions of who owns what, but the basic assumption that ownership is a fundamental component of social relationships. This theme frames the typically gorgeous Malick imagery of the natural world in a particular light. The world is beautiful, and we fail to appreciate it, consumed instead by greed and our desire to divide the world. We live in heaven, and we squander it every day. Number 9, Blade Runner. Blade Runner was pretty seismic for me, and I suspect it was for a lot of young cinephiles. It was one of my favorite films as a teenager, so much so that I actually started to worry as I got older that the film was actually a bit juvenile, something to be loved in adolescence, but held at more of an arm's length with age and more sophisticated tastes. These fears didn't amount to much, though. On the contrary, revisiting the film in adulthood, not only do I love Blade Runner as passionately as I ever did, it might even be a little better. No longer quite so dazzled by the cyberpunk aesthetic and staggering visual effects achievement, though to be clear, both of those things still rule, I can better grapple with the film as a profoundly insightful portrait of a future where technological advancement has only advanced social inequities rather than remedied them. The promise of a better tomorrow is sequestered to off-world colonies we don't even see. Our time is spent in the slums on Earth, and an increasingly brutal and inhospitable Earth at that. This backdrop informs Deckard's hunt for escaped replicants, our main story, but also just another manifestation of the cruelty which maintains this world. But there is also mercy, and with it, the hope that our humanity isn't lost. Number 8, The Manchurian Candidate. I'm on record saying The Manchurian Candidate was essential to my growth as a cinephile, but it's not placed so highly purely out of gratitude for turning me into a film nerd. Hell, if anything, I should probably resent the film and John Frankenheimer for that, but The Manchurian Candidate is just too great to deny, even if it arguably ruined my life. The film basically paved the way for the paranoia thrillers of the 70s a full decade in advance, playing into the contemporary Red Scare in the most sensationalist ways possible, before revealing a more insidious and disturbing conspiracy. The film's set pieces aren't just highly suspenseful, they're also strange, with the brainwashing presentation especially just being completely unique. And man, cold and friendless Raymond turns out to be a surprisingly likable character, which injects a real sense of personal tragedy to the film's many thrills. Jokes aside, I am grateful for how much The Manchurian Candidate offered me, and continues to offer me. Number 7, Bonnie and Clyde. The film that launched the new Hollywood and the purest distillation of it. Beyond the graphic bloodshed and explicit sexuality, beyond the moral ambiguity, beyond even the reconfiguration of classic gangster movies, Bonnie and Clyde is the perfect fusion of the French New Wave's formal experimentation and the Hollywood tradition of storytelling. The film is deceptively loose, luring us casually into the characters and their love affair. There is a light, almost whimsical quality, until the killing of a bank teller lunges us into bloody violence, and the grim fate of the lovers becomes inevitable. The resulting film has the spontaneous, almost improvisational feel, free from the constraints of plot, while still being immaculately structured and efficient, every scene pushing us towards the inevitability of Bonnie and Clyde's deaths, even if it's not obvious it's doing that in the moment. And for all the famous bloodshed, this is legitimately one of the most moving love stories I've ever seen. The romance is flawed, for obvious reasons and less obvious ones, but there's such a genuine affection between these two. You've made me somebody they're gonna remember. That line gets more and more touching and heartbreaking with every rewatch. Number 6, Citizen Kane. You can cry and moan about this being a boring choice all you want. Facts are facts. Kane rules, and you know I'm right. If anything, the film isn't loved enough. Yes, really. Citizen Kane's legacy as the greatest movie ever made causes newcomers to view it as homework. This old movie you have to get through to earn your cinephile cred. But that's all bunk. This film moves with propulsive energy. The story of Kane's life is told with streamlined efficiency, clocking in at just under 2 hours while still having a massive sweep. Every scene is brimming with the excitement of cinematic possibility. You can just feel how much fun Orson Welles is having playing with the camera, and that joy is infectious, and that also comes through in his grandiose performance. The film is a grand narrative, an introspective character study, a formally ambitious achievement, and a thrilling bit of entertainment. More than just historical importance, Citizen Kane is the epitome of what is possible when the full weight of Hollywood machinery is put behind a great story. Well, it's almost the epitome. Number 5, The Godfather Parts 1. That's by design. A film stewing in the misery of what Michael's choices have wrought. Corleone family. Number 4, Seven Samurai. One thing this list has probably made clear is that for whatever snobby preconceptions I have about myself, I also yearn for adventure. I want action, I want danger, I want heroes triumphing over insurmountable odds. And no film gives me those things better than Seven Samurai. The basic premise of a collection of warriors protecting an impoverished town has been repackaged endlessly, but the original is still king. The battle scenes in the film's back half are excellent, frenetic and exciting and full of striking compositions. Equally impressive, though, is how long the film takes to get there. Seven Samurai might be as famous for its intimidating runtime as it is for its quality, but Kurosawa doesn't waste a minute. We get such a strong sense of the samurai, and see them becoming a unit, and of the town and the fissures within it. Indeed, the town is not just a setting for a good battle. It feels like a real place, one whose inhabitants may not be as innocent as they first appeared. And in the most stacked of ensembles, I have to signal out Toshiro Mifune's Kukuchiyo. I don't know if it's the best Mifune, but it's certainly the most Mifune, and I love it. Number 3, Fanny and Alexander. Look, there's a reason I use this clip every chance I get. This is Bishop Edvard Vergerus, one of the all-time bastards of the cinema, who marries the recently widowed Emily and subjects her young children, the titular Fanny and Alexander, to cruel discipline and abuse. That is the film's primary site of conflict, but it's not strictly the focus. The film has a dense script with dozens of characters and several storylines, but it's less concerned with pushing a plot forward than chronicling a year of the Ekdahl family's life. The story with the bishop is pivotal, especially as Alexander fights against Edvard's authority, but it's also just one chapter in a larger family's tapestry, one which also includes episodes of comedy, joy, mourning, and ultimately reconciliation. This is especially true of the complete version of the film. The 3-hour cut, it gets the job done just fine, but it's in the full 5 hours that Fanny and Alexander reaches perfection. I truly cannot imagine losing the scene where Oscar entertains the children with talk of a magic chair. Fanny and Alexander was made when Ingmar Bergman had long established himself as a master of the form, and indeed, the film proceeds with the confidence and patience of an old master. Crossing autobiography with cinematic imagination, cohering his major themes, and even calling back to his own masterpieces, Fanny and Alexander is Bergman's magnum opus. Okay, one more time. Number 2, Dr. Strangelove.
Or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and
Love the Bomb. A moving picture.
Choosing a favorite Kubrick movie is like choosing a favorite child. I have a clear answer, but I feel bad because I really do love them all. As with many of the comedies in this list, a key factor here is the movie just makes me laugh a whole lot. Scenes like the president's tepid phone call to the Russian premier.
Why do you think I'm calling you? Just to say hello? Of course I like to speak to you. Of course I like to say hello. Not now, but anytime.
Or Major Kong's iconic rocket ride are among the best comedy scenes in film history. But what keeps me cracking up on subsequent viewings is just how well defined the various comic personalities are. Peter Sellers is, of course, fantastic in triple roles. 2 as nebbish straight men, and 1 as an absurdist comic creation. But it's the non-comedy actors that steal the show. Sterling Hayden is so resolutely committed to General Ripper's insane worldview, and the fact that he never feels like he's playing for laughs makes it a million times funnier. I also love that, despite his self-righteousness,
but today, war is too important to be left to politicians.
He immediately folds when troops enter the base.
I don't know how well I could stand up under torture.
And then there's George C. Scott as General Buck Turgidson. Brash, boisterous, and gleeful, like a little boy in an adult's body. Scott was famously tricked into giving a more over-the-top performance than he intended, Kubrick telling the actor these were just warm-up takes, and I feel a bit bad about that deception, but not too bad because this is the best comedic performance I've ever seen. Everything Scott does or says makes me laugh.
It is the avowed policy of our country never to strike first with nuclear weapons.
Well, as president, I would say that General Ripper has already invalidated that policy. You just can't expect a bunch of ignorant peons to understand a machine like some of our boys. And that's not meant as an insult, Mr. Ambassador.
And at the center of all this laughter is one of the most incisive political satires ever made. A defining document of the Cold War and a mirror to the childish competition and conspiratorial mindset which still plagues geopolitics. Number 1, Raging Bull. Because it feels like a movie ripped out of someone's soul. I've been weighing why Raging Bull is my favorite movie over the last year or so, and that really is the long and short of it. It's such a raw window into the worst aspects of a person, achingly vulnerable and unguarded. Which is interesting considering Scorsese was not initially interested in directing the story. It was Robert De Niro who was obsessed with Jake LaMotta's biography, and he had to convince his friend to come on board. And it wasn't just De Niro. It took Scorsese's personal life falling apart in a haze of drugs, divorces, and a near fatal overdose before he agreed to Raging Bull. Makes sense. This is the kind of material that almost requires hitting rock bottom to tap into. Jake LaMotta is one of the most openly loathsome people you'll ever see in a feature film. A paranoid bully who hurls abuse on anyone in his orbit while bulldozing his way towards self-destruction. The kind of person you'd need a little bit of self-loathing to really get inside. The film does not endorse Jake, but it doesn't exactly apologize for him either. There are no attempts to explain why he's like this, or have him learn a lesson. Even when he loses everything, it doesn't feel like a comeuppance so much as the natural result of his behavior. For that reason, the film can be a bitter pill. Make no mistake, Raging Bull is my number 1, but it's far from the first movie in my list I'd urge others to see. It's too ugly and uncompromising. All the more so, given I'm not even sure the film is saying that much. It's certainly revealing of jealousy, of guilt, of anger, but it doesn't offer a culminating statement. What it does offer is pure expression. Scorsese has said he directed Raging Bull under the assumption it might be the last movie he'd ever make, and that belief is apparent across all levels of the filmmaking. The boxing matches especially take on a mythic quality, becoming abstractions of Jake's penchant for abuse towards himself and others. But even the more modest domestic scenes are marked by that same intensity. It's not a film for everyone, but it is for me, the most potent cinematic expression I've ever seen. That's entertainment.
That's entertainment.
And that's my list. Whew, this was honestly a lot of fun. I'm not sure what I'll do if I ever hit 200k, but I think we did 100 okay. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again soon.